It is easy to think of human history as the story of a single species. After all, for the last 300,000 years, Homo sapiens have spread across every continent, built civilizations, and reshaped the planet in ways no other animal ever has. But our story is only the final chapter of something far older. Long before our species appeared, the world belonged to other kinds of humans, relatives that walked different landscapes, faced different dangers, and ultimately disappeared. Together, the genus Homo stretches back nearly 3 million years, a vast span of time filled with lives that ended in ways almost impossible to experience today. Imagine standing beside an ancient river in Africa, where a single drink of water could place you within striking distance of a crocodile larger than a bus. Picture crossing an open plain while giant hyenas, built to crush bone, watched from the shadows. Even looking to the sky offered little comfort, because enormous birds of prey could see small human ancestors not as curious primates, but as food. And those were only the visible threats. Hidden dangers lurked inside the body itself, where a simple tooth infection, too much of a certain vitamin, or an untreated injury could become a slow and inevitable death sentence. So, how did ancient humans actually die? More importantly, what do those deaths reveal about the world they lived in? Fossils are often seen as silent fragments of bone, but many preserve far more than the shape of an ancient skeleton. They record moments of violence, encounters with predators, devastating diseases, and natural disasters frozen in time. Each one is a clue, offering a glimpse into environments that no longer exist and dangers that vanished alongside them. By piecing together these remarkable discoveries, we can reconstruct not just how our ancient relatives died, but why surviving long enough to become modern humans was one of the greatest achievements in the history of life itself. Among the countless dangers that shaped early human evolution, one stands apart because it did not come from a predator, a disease, or a changing climate. It came from another human, or, more accurately, from one of our ancient relatives. Long before cities, kingdoms, or organized warfare existed, the evidence suggests that members of the genus Homo were already capable of turning deadly violence against their own kind. The story begins around 430,000 years ago in what is now northern Spain. Deep inside a cave, archaeologists uncovered the skull of an individual belonging to Homo heidelbergensis, an extinct human species often regarded as one of the closest relatives of both Neanderthals and modern humans. At first glance, the fossil appeared unremarkable, but a closer inspection revealed something deeply unsettling. Two large holes pierced the front of the skull, almost perfectly matching one another in size and shape. The injuries immediately raised a question. Had this individual simply fallen onto sharp rocks inside the cave? That seemed plausible until researchers realized that a single accident was unlikely to produce two nearly identical fractures. Another possibility was an attack by a large predator. Yet, no known animal living in that region at the time could have produced wounds with this distinctive pattern. The evidence instead pointed towards something far more familiar. The fractures closely resembled blunt force trauma created by repeated blows from a stone tool, likely a hand axe. More importantly, forensic analysis suggested that both strikes occurred while the individual was still alive and were powerful enough to be fatal. Rather than an accident, the skull preserved what is currently considered the oldest known case of homicide in the human lineage. The cave itself only deepened the mystery. It contained the remains of thousands of ancient human bones, many belonging to different individuals who had died over long periods. Several also showed signs of severe trauma, although none were as old as this particular skull. Because of the unusual concentration of bodies, some researchers believe the cave may represent one of the earliest known places where the dead were deliberately deposited. If so, it hints that these ancient humans were doing more than disposing of bodies. They may already have been recognizing death as something worthy of ritual or remembrance, even in a world where surviving another day was never guaranteed. If the oldest known murder tells us that ancient humans sometimes feared one another, the next discovery reminds us of an even harsher reality. For much of our evolutionary history, humans were not the dominant hunters we imagine today. They were often hunted themselves. The African landscape was filled with predators that had been perfecting their craft for millions of years before the first stone tools ever appeared, and our ancestors frequently found themselves near the bottom of that food chain. One fossil in particular offers an unusually detailed glimpse into that dangerous world. Known as OH7, this individual belonged to Homo habilis, one of the earliest members of our genus. Living nearly 2 million years ago, Homo habilis was remarkably small by modern standards, standing only around 4 feet tall. With a slight frame and limited defensive capabilities, survival depended on constant awareness of the environment. Even then, awareness was not always enough. The evidence preserved in OH7's remains points to an encounter with one of the most formidable predators ever to inhabit African waterways. Large puncture wounds on the left leg indicate an attack by an enormous crocodile, believed to have been Crocodilus thorbjarnarsoni, an extinct species capable of reaching nearly 25 feet in length and weighing more than 2 tons. For a small early human approaching the water's edge, such an ambush would have been almost impossible to escape. The injuries tell a desperate story. The crocodile appears to have seized the leg with tremendous force, leaving deep punctures and tearing away portions of the limb entirely. Even if OH7 managed to break free, the chances of surviving such catastrophic wounds in a prehistoric wetland were almost non-existent. Massive blood loss, shock, and infection alone would have been fatal. Yet the fossil preserves another, even stranger clue. Deep grooves carved into the back of the skull resemble the marks left by a large feline predator, one whose hunting behavior involved attacking from behind. Because there are no signs of healing on either the leg or the skull, researchers have suggested that both attacks occurred within the same fatal encounter. One possibility is that after escaping the crocodile's jaws, the injured Homo habilis turned to face the reptile, leaving the back of the head exposed to a second predator waiting nearby. Whether this was a coordinated sequence or an extraordinary coincidence remains impossible to know, but the result was the same. Today, crocodiles and big cats are still among Africa's most dangerous predators, occasionally competing over the same prey. Nearly 2 million years ago, however, that prey sometimes included our own relatives. It is a sobering reminder that before humans learned to dominate the natural world, they spent countless generations simply trying not to become another meal. Not every threat that shaped human evolution had teeth, claws, or overwhelming strength. Some dangers came disguised as food. In a world without medicine, nutritional science, or even the faintest understanding of how the human body worked, a perfectly edible meal could slowly become a deadly poison. One remarkable fossil reveals just how unforgiving that reality could be. Discovered in Kenya in 1974, the partial skeleton known as KNMER1808 belonged to Homo erectus and dates to roughly 1.7 million years ago. Unlike fossils that preserve dramatic bite marks or crushing fractures, this individual's bones told a quieter story. Researchers noticed unusual patterns of bone growth throughout the skeleton, particularly in the limbs, along with evidence of excessive bone turnover and repeated internal bleeding. There were no signs of violent trauma, yet something had clearly gone terribly wrong over a long period of time. The abnormalities matched a condition still recognized today: chronic vitamin A toxicity, also known as hypervitaminosis A. While vitamin A is essential for healthy vision, immunity, and growth, consuming it in extreme quantities over an extended period can have devastating effects. Bones become painfully fragile, joints ache constantly, skin begins to peel, hair and teeth may fall out, and internal organs gradually suffer irreversible damage. The fossil suggests this individual endured many of these symptoms for months, perhaps even years, before finally succumbing to the illness. But where could an early human have obtained such dangerously high amounts of vitamin A? The most likely answer lies in the liver of large carnivores. Predator livers are extraordinary storage organs, concentrating enormous quantities of the vitamin. Even today, the liver of animals such as polar bears contains enough vitamin A to make a person seriously ill after a single meal. To an early Homo erectus, however, liver would have appeared to be an especially valuable prize, rich, nutritious, and far too precious to waste. Without any knowledge of toxic doses, repeatedly consuming these organs could transform a successful hunt into a slow-moving tragedy. It is an unsettling reminder that survival was not simply about finding enough food. Choosing the wrong food, or even too much of the right one, could be just as fatal. Long before hospitals, blood tests, or dietary guidelines existed, nature had countless ways of claiming a life, many of them invisible until it was already too late. If dangers lurking on the ground were not enough, ancient humans also had reason to fear something that most of us rarely think about today: the sky. Modern birds of prey are certainly formidable hunters, but they pose virtually no threat to people. Millions of years ago, however, the balance was very different. For some of our smallest ancestors, the shadow passing overhead may have been every bit as terrifying as the growl of a predator hidden in the grass. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence comes from the famous Taung child, a juvenile Australopithecus africanus that lived roughly 2.8 million years ago. Although this individual technically predates the genus Homo, the fossil offers such an extraordinary glimpse into the dangers faced by our early relatives that it has become one of the most remarkable prehistoric crime scenes ever discovered. When the skull was first examined, researchers focused primarily on its importance as an early human ancestor. It was only decades later that another story began to emerge. The eye sockets contained distinctive puncture marks, while the top of the skull bore deep scratches unlike those produced by mammalian predators. These injuries closely matched the damage seen on modern monkeys captured by large eagles, whose powerful talons pin the victim while the hooked beak tears into the skull and face. The similarities were difficult to ignore. Rather than dying on the ground, the Taung child may have been seized from above by an enormous bird of prey. If so, it would represent one of the clearest examples of an early human relative falling victim to an aerial predator. For a small-bodied juvenile living in open woodland, the sky itself was another hunting ground occupied by animals capable of spotting vulnerable prey from remarkable distances. Yet the fossil presents another mystery that remains unresolved. Only the skull was discovered, resting deep inside a cave in a remote region where no matching skeleton or significant collection of other animal bones accompanied it. How did it end up there? One intriguing hypothesis suggests that the predator carried its prey back to a nesting site, much as large eagles do today. After consuming the soft tissues, parts of the skeleton may have remained in the nest until the skull eventually became dislodged. By chance, it could have rolled or fallen into the nearby cave, where it remained protected for millions of years before finally being uncovered. If that interpretation is correct, the Taung child's final resting place was not chosen by ancient humans or natural forces alone, but by a predator whose nest inadvertently preserved one of the most important fossils ever found. Predators, disease, and violence claimed countless lives throughout human evolution. But sometimes nature operated on an entirely different scale. Instead of targeting individuals, it reshaped entire landscapes in a matter of hours, sweeping away everything caught in its path. One collection of fossils from the Indonesian island of Java may preserve the aftermath of just such a catastrophe, offering a rare glimpse into what could have been the final moments of one of humanity's longest-lived relatives. Homo erectus was one of the greatest success stories in our evolutionary history. Emerging nearly 2 million years ago, this adaptable human species became the first to spread far beyond Africa, eventually reaching Europe and much of Asia. They survived dramatic climate shifts, occupied a remarkable range of environments, and endured for well over a million years. Yet every species has an end, and the youngest known Homo erectus fossils, dating to around 110,000 years ago, all come from a single region of Java. What makes these remains so intriguing is not simply their age, but the way they were found. More than a dozen adult individuals were discovered together, their bones mixed within the same deposit. There was little evidence of disease, prolonged illness, or injuries that could explain their deaths one by one. Instead, the surrounding sediments pointed toward a sudden and overwhelming event involving massive amounts of water. Researchers have proposed that powerful floods carried the bodies downstream before trapping them in a natural logjam, where they eventually became buried and fossilized. Another possibility is even more dramatic. Java sits atop one of the most volcanically active regions on Earth, and an eruption may have unleashed devastating lahars, fast-moving torrents of water, volcanic ash, mud, and rock capable of racing for dozens of miles while obliterating everything in their path. Such disasters still occur today, leaving entire communities buried beneath thick layers of debris within hours. If that interpretation is correct, these fossils may preserve something extraordinarily rare: not simply the remains of ancient humans, but the aftermath of an extinction unfolding in real time. At the same time, researchers cautioned that catastrophe alone probably did not erase Homo erectus. Evidence suggests Java's forests were gradually transforming into dense rainforests, altering the habitats on which these populations depended. In that sense, the flood may not have ended the species by itself. It may have delivered the final blow to a population already struggling to survive in a world that was quietly changing around them. Even as Homo erectus learned to craft better stone tools, cooperate in groups, and hunt increasingly large animals, there were still places where humans were far from the top of the food chain. Evolution is often portrayed as a steady climb toward dominance, as though becoming Earth's apex predator was somehow inevitable. The fossil record tells a far less comforting story. For hundreds of thousands of years, there were predators so powerful that even our cleverest ancestors struggled to compete with them, and one of the most formidable was a giant hyena unlike anything alive today. This was Pachyrhinocuta, an extinct hyena that dwarfed most modern species. Weighing as much as 330 pounds, it rivaled lionesses in size while possessing the massive skull and bone-crushing jaws that hyenas are famous for. Those jaws were capable of generating extraordinary bite forces, easily splintering thick bones to reach the nutrient-rich marrow hidden inside. To an early human, encountering one of these carnivores would have been less like facing a scavenger and more like confronting a heavily built predator equipped with nature's version of industrial bone cutters. Evidence of that frightening reality comes from the famous Peking man site in China, where the remains of more than 2 dozen Homo erectus individuals have been uncovered. Many of the fossils bear unmistakable bite marks, shattered skulls, and crushed limb bones. In fact, roughly two-thirds of the human remains recovered from the site show damage consistent with attacks or scavenging by Pachyrhinocuta. Some bones were broken so completely that researchers believe the hyenas were not merely feeding on flesh, but pulverizing entire limbs to consume the marrow inside. When these fossils were first discovered, archaeologists proposed a very different explanation. Stone tools found throughout the cave led some to believe the site represented a settlement where violent conflict, or even cannibalism, had occurred. As more animal remains were analyzed, however, a clearer picture emerged. The cave appears to have functioned primarily as a hyena den. Humans likely occupied it only intermittently, perhaps after the predators had abandoned it, leaving behind tools that later became mixed with the scattered bones. Rather than documenting humans preying on one another, the site revealed a landscape where giant carnivores repeatedly preyed upon humans. It is a humbling reminder that intelligence alone did not guarantee survival. For much of prehistory, humans shared their world with animals that were stronger, faster, and better equipped for direct combat. Our ancestors did not simply inherit the role of apex predator. They survived countless generations competing for it. Had evolution taken only a slightly different course, it is entirely possible that the descendants of those giant hyenas, rather than humans, would have remained the dominant force across the landscape. As terrifying as giant predators and natural disasters were, some of the deadliest threats in prehistory would seem almost trivial today. A single infected tooth, for example, is now usually treated with a routine visit to the dentist. For ancient humans, it could mean a slow and unavoidable death. That appears to have been the fate of the famous Turkana boy, one of the most complete Homo erectus skeletons ever discovered. Although he showed no evidence of a fatal attack, his jaw told a different story. As his adult teeth erupted, they appear to have grown in awkwardly, damaging the surrounding tissue and allowing bacteria to invade. The resulting abscess likely spread through his bloodstream, causing sepsis, a condition that remains dangerous even with modern medicine, but would have been almost impossible to survive 1.5 million years ago. His suffering may not have ended there. Later studies also suggested he had a severely herniated disc, an injury capable of causing intense pain and severely limiting mobility. Even if the infection had not claimed his life, such a condition would have made escaping predators, finding food, or simply keeping pace with his group incredibly difficult. The story of Turkana Boy reminds us that ancient humans did not need to face monstrous predators or catastrophic floods to perish. Sometimes, the greatest threat was an ordinary medical problem that modern healthcare has taught us to take for granted. In a world without antibiotics, surgery, or even basic hygiene, survival often depended as much on avoiding small misfortunes as escaping extraordinary ones. Each of these discoveries tells the story of a single individual, but together they reveal something much larger. Every fossil preserves more than the moment of death. It captures a world that no longer exists, a world where giant crocodiles ruled the rivers, enormous birds hunted from the skies, bone-crushing hyenas competed with humans for survival, and even a simple infection could quietly become fatal. These remains are not merely ancient skeletons. They are snapshots of the environments that shaped the course of human evolution. Over nearly 3 million years, countless members of the human family faced dangers that varied from one landscape to another. Violence claimed some lives. Predators claimed many more. Disease, nutritional mistakes, natural disasters, and shifting climates continually tested the limits of what early humans could endure. Every generation that survived passed along the traits that helped the next endure an equally unforgiving world, while countless others vanished from the evolutionary record. Today, many of those threats are gone. We no longer share our world with giant hyenas or crocodiles unlike anything alive today, and modern medicine has transformed illnesses that once meant certain death into routine treatments. Yet the bodies we inhabit and the instincts we rely on were forged during millions of years spent overcoming those very challenges. In the end, Homo sapiens are not the beginning of the human story. We are its last surviving branch. Every fossil we uncover is a reminder that our family tree was once far larger, and that the line leading to us survived by the narrowest of margins. Had history unfolded only slightly differently, we might have been just another collection of ancient bones waiting to be discovered millions of years from now.